Our journey to the restricted zone we started from the city of Fukushima. It is an administrative center of the prefecture of the same name in 70 kilometers to the north from the crippled power plant. What strikes you the most when you drive along this road is almost total absence of cars and any other signs of life. Small towns seem desolated, although it is still 30 kilometers away from our goal. Sometimes you see people, mostly police officers. They are gathered from all over the country to prevent thefts and looting. You can get into the restricted zone only if you have a special permit from the local authorities. They are very reluctant to give it to journalists. Our first checkpoint at the entry to the town named Namie. It is 15 kilometers to the north from the nuclear station. We are heading to the seashore. On the 11th of March 2011, it was hit by the 10 meters high tsunami wave. Before that, here was a residential neighborhood. In place of houses that stood close to each other, now we see leveled foundations. Only a few tattered buildings are still standing over this desert. For the last 5 years, people who lived in this house have never been here. Let's see what's in this fridge. Bottle of green tea, expired in 2011. Keep going toward the nuclear plant as close as possible. A desolated cemetery in the dead zone looks like ruins of some ancient city. They decided not to demolish it. Sometimes people come here, they also have to get the permit, but this time nobody has come. This part of the shore had been devastated by the horrifying tsunami sent by the strongest quake during the daytime. The grown-ups were working, children were at school. Those who couldn't escape had no chance to survive. As a rule, after strong quakes, gyms of Japanese schools become the refuge centers. People lay mats right on the floor and stay here until it's safe enough to return homes. But in this school things went wrong. The first floor was flooded, it sagged under the weight of water, and before water was gone, radioactive explosions at the Fukushima dai-ichi plant had already begun. But locals were informed of it only on the next day. For a while they had been staying on the upper floors of the remaining buildings, waiting for help and for the tide wave going back to the ocean. On a clear day, the pipes and towers of the unfortunate plant can be seen from the window of this computer classroom. Things haven't changed much here for the last 5 years. They took some rubbish away and moved desks and chairs to the walls. Children will never come here again. This school probably will be demolished, but when it will happen, nobody knows. Before that, it will remain here as an ugly embodiment of that awful catastrophe. For the past 5 years, an exclusion area around the Fukushima plant had shrunken deliberately. Officials are still full of hope to give all these cities back to their residents. Around the closed zones, the decontamination activities are underway. Despite high level of radiation, they decided to open the road that goes through for the trucks and special vehicles. Stopping and going outside are strictly prohibited. The police come immediately. We make a brief stop on our own account at the closest possible place to the station. Pipes and power line posts seen from here. It is the Fukushima plant. Welcome to the city Dai-ichi nuclear power plant is written on this sign, but there barely would be anyone who might wish to enjoy such hospitality for decades from now on. Dosimeter shows level of radiation 20 times higher than normal. We spent 5 days around the plant. Exclusion zone is divided into several areas. They differ from each other by the extent of restrictions. The easiest to get in are the places where reconstruction works have already begun. You recognize these areas by the vast gathering of these giant black bags. The only way to get rid of contaminated soil is to remove and isolate the upper layer of the ground. How many billions of tons are already packed in these vinyl sacks? Hard to imagine, but this work is still far from over. Besides, the general background radiation in these areas is high. Streets are keeping signs of disastrous strike, sagged and ruined houses along the sides of the road. But they don't look so desolated. They are surrounded by the safety barriers and warning signs. Another scene opens up in front of you when you get into the area of the highest danger. Nobody has touched these cars since the 11th of March 2011. Parking lots overgrown with the wild weeds is an eloquent mark of the dead city. After 5 years, they have turned into the useless piles of rubbish. And it is not only the destructive cause of nature and climate. Geiger counter indicates 40 microsieverts. These cars can't be used even as a scrap metal. Allowed level of radioactivity is not more than 0.3 microsieverts. It means that in just 1 hour, a man gets here 5 days dose of radiation. Tsunami didn't reach this part of the town. It seems that people fled from this casino right after the quake. Nobody could imagine at that time that the worst had yet to come. They hardly could foresee that because of breakdown at the nuclear plant, they wouldn't be able to return to their places for years. We were the first who entered this convenience store. It was clear when we opened the door and were struck by the terrible reek of the rotten food. It is scattered all over the floor, mixed with broken glass of bottles, small goods and pieces of shelves. This small town is called Tomioka, not more than 3 kilometers away from the Fukushima dai-ichi plant. Residents were evacuated immediately. From time to time, silence gets broken by the howling of the wind. It taps with torn-off iron sheets, shakes the wild grass and boughs of the overgrown trees. The only unnatural sound here is a constant churring noise of our dosimeter. Let's try to check the radiation here, at the railway station. Wow, 45 microsieverts, 150 times higher than normal. We'd better get out of here. People here were not just leaving this town, they were running for their lives, not even trying to take their precious belongings with them. Probably they wouldn't have acted the same way if somebody would have told them that even in 5 years, the way back home would still be closed for them. At this DVD and CD rental shop they planned a big sale for the 12th and 13th of March, but it never happened. Officials of the administration of this town told us that even the approximate date of the start of the reconstruction activities here had not been set. The level of radiation is too high. It means that the playground with swings and slides will be overgrown with radioactive grass, and new layers of contaminated dust will keep covering the empty flats with broken windows. As for now, 50,000 people are evacuated from the dangerous area. When you walk along the streets, you can't imagine that the previous unconcerned life will ever return here. Of course, sooner or later the decontamination work will be done here too, but according to the questionnaire polls, only 12% of former residents actually return to the towns where deactivation is officially completed. People who lived around the nuclear plant were evacuated to the temporary refuge settlements in other prefectures. Many have managed to start a new life in a new place. Most of the people have escaped the impact of the radioactive exposure. The disaster at the nuclear plant in Fukushima differs from the one in Chernobyl. Those doses of radiation that people had got in the beginning of the breakdown had not hit their health directly, but indirect effects have already started to come out. Among the evacuees from Fukushima, there are a lot of people diagnosed with pancreatic diabetes. The main cause is the change of their lifestyle. People who got used to work on land suddenly lost their jobs. As a result, lack of physical activity, stress and overeating, pernicious habits. Pancreatic diabetes causes very dangerous diseases such as stroke, heart attack, renal failure, immunity disorders, and these can eventually provoke cancer. That's what concerns us the most, says Koichi Tanigawa, professor of the Fukushima Medical University. Before the nuclear disaster, there were a lot of farms in this part of Fukushima prefecture. The radiation had left people unemployed. All the cattle were slaughtered, contaminated fields were banned to cultivate. This is the only pasture still in use. We are talking to a farmer standing right on the border of the restricted zone. It is divided from us by the wire. The cows chewing hay are inside the exclusion area. The grass on this field is extremely contaminated with radiation. The level is very high. The cows are fed with it. You may call it a scientific experiment to understand the effects of radioactivity on the health. Every month we do the blood tests. Officially, these data are not open for public. Of course, we can't sell this meat, but I don't want to kill them. Masami Yoshizawa is a respected person in Fukushima. He owns several farms, and this unusual one is totally his whim. Almost all these animals were rescued and gathered here in Fukushima during the first year after the breakdown at the nuclear plant. In 2011, abandoned farmhouses had turned to the real cemeteries of domestic animals. These are the corpses of the cows died of famine. Bound to their mangers, they couldn't get food. Those who were lucky to escape had become free inhabitants of the inclusion zone for months. Now all of them are here. Yoshizawa-san says that he runs this farm to vex and annoy the Japanese government. Scientific experiment is a side effect of his enterprise. The main reason is ideological protest against the plans to return the full-fledged production of nuclear energy in Japan. The government had ordered to slaughter all the livestock here because it's like a thorn in their side. But I don't want to obey this kind of orders. Nuclear energy is not for Japan. March the 11th proved it beyond a reasonable doubt, but they don't learn lessons from life. Meat of these cows contains exceeding amount of radionuclides. Yoshizawa doesn't believe in statements of the government which says that all measures have been taken to protect people from the harm of radiation and that Japan is ready to restart most of its nuclear plants that have not been operating since the disaster 5 years ago. These kind of white spots have started to appear on skin of the cows that had been eating hay enriched with radioactive strontium and cesium. Nobody knows for sure whether it is a result of radioactive contamination or not. What can be said for sure is that this strange effect is observed only in Fukushima, namely in the areas close to the devastated nuclear plant. The question of how radiation from Fukushima may affect people's health is not a subject for official discussion in Japan. At the best, authorities refer to the absence of the scientific evidence, but most of the time they just say that there is absolutely no danger. During the interview, professor of the Fukushima Medical University told us that living in areas where level of radiation is 30 times higher than normal, 100 millisieverts per year, is actually harmless. As we can see from the experience of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, radiation exposure of more than 100 millisieverts per year heightens the risk for developing cancer only by 1%. In terms of oncological diseases, such radiation is as harmful as smoking. Of course, it is difficult to argue with a specialist, but at some reason these kind of statements also don't look convincing to 88% of former residents of Fukushima Prefecture who refuse to return to their officially declared safe towns and villages. High level of radiation is not only inside the exclusion zone. Outside of it, background radioactivity exceeds pre-disaster figures many times. At the plant itself, the decontamination work has not gone too far. Melted down nuclear fuel is still inside the reactors, and radiation from them continues to seep into the ocean. In 5 hours that we spent in the restricted area, we had got, according to the Geiger counter, radiation exposure that people normally get within 3 to 5 days. In terms of the liquidators of the Fukushima plant, it's not too much. They get such amount of radionuclides in half an hour. Anyway, it would be naive to expect that people will return here soon, just because the government already said that it would take no less than 30 years to complete the cleanup in Fukushima.